I tell you what, it's not like the olden days. I'm Jake.
I'm Rosie.
And what's the show? It's Mike and Angelo, which was a children's ITV sitcom, as it were, which was broadcast between 1989 and 2000 in 12 series, which is quite a lot for any show, particularly a children's show. It was written by Lee Pressman and Grant Cathro, who you can see with writing credits on a lot of children's television from around that sort of time, late 80s and 90s. They're quite famous for doing Teabag, I think. I was looking up what else they'd done earlier. They dabbled with Children's Ward in the early days. And the one other show of theirs that we might one day podcast about is the 90s version of the Tomorrow People. But that might not be as complimentary as our Mike and Angelo podcast will be. Now, the first two series of Mike and Angelo, I do not believe we've ever sat and watched all the way through. In fact, I'm quite confident that the only experience we have with an episode from the first two series is CITV's Old School Weekend, which was the celebration of 30 years of CITV at the beginning of 2013, where they showed lots of episodes of old shows, and they showed an episode from, I think, series 2 of Mike and Angelo. And a very interesting experience it was, because we really only avidly watched the second half, as it were, of Mike and Angelo, the second batch of 6 series, so we weren't at all familiar with the early ones. But we did have more than a passing familiarity with the late early series, as it were, the middle series. But as I said, I don't think we'd ever seen an episode from the first two series before. And what makes the first two series different, interesting, is that the wrong person is playing Angelo, who, as you may guess, is one of the title characters, Mike and Angelo. Set that aside for a moment. The premise of the show is that Mike, who is a young boy, and his mother, Rita, have moved to Cricklewood from Boston, Massachusetts, as one does, and Mike is having trouble adjusting to life in a new country, feeling like a bit of a fish out of water, like Willie DeWitt in San Francisco, and he is helped in his transition to his new life by the fact that an alien comes out of his wardrobe. And the alien is transitioning to life on Earth and is a fish out of water as well. And that alien is Angelo, as you may suppose. I think he's come through a sort of portal in Mike's wardrobe from a different dimension and also planet. Possibly it's fully explained in early episodes that we're not familiar with. But it's the meeting of the two fish out of water and helping each other to adjust to their new lives. That's the original concept, isn't it?
So I hear. It's a shame we haven't seen a Series 1 episode, because I think they probably finish with that sort of thing in the first series.
Yes, it seems so. I think the show, which is inevitably going to happen over 12 series, does take something of a new direction that they perhaps weren't thinking of at first.
In the episode that we saw in Old School Weekend, neither of them seemed particularly to be a fish out of water, did they?
I guess they were quite used to their new situation, quite used to each other. In this episode we saw, and those who were lucky enough to watch it in 1989 and 1990 would have seen them every week. We met Shelley Thompson as Rita, Mike's mom, Matt Wright as Mike, and Tyler Butterworth as Angelo. Already shaking her head. You may have noticed I said earlier the wrong person playing Angelo. Wrong in the sense of it wasn't the one we were used to, because Tim Whitnell played him for 10 series that we watched, but also wrong in the sense that, well, we don't think he's nearly as good as Tim Whitnell. He's not bad, Tyler Butterworth, but Tim Whitnell brings something magical to the character of Angelo that is really missing from those early episodes, and I guess they didn't really know they needed in the show until Tim Whitnell took over. It's like when you start making men behaving badly, you don't realise you need Neil Morrissey to do it. But then when he comes in, you realise, oh yes, we do. And I think the same is true of Tim Whitnell and Mike and Angelo.
Well, I suspect you're going to put the URL address for that website all about Mike and Angelo.
Oh yes, I must do that.
Which has lots of details, and actually the creators will tell you on that website somewhere in an interview, I think, that they felt all along that Tyler Butterworth wasn't quite playing the role as they envisaged it.
Which is probably why he was replaced, I suppose.
I think it says in this interview that it was.
He's very lively, energetic, naive, wide-eyed kind of thing, which Tim Whitnell is as Angelo, and it suits the character of Angelo, not really knowing what he's doing on Earth. But he doesn't have that quirkiness, that really extreme, surreal, alien nature that Tim Whitnell brings to it. We very much noticed that the second series episode that we watched very much followed the formula and had the same feel as later episodes that we were used to, with a completely different cast. So the show obviously had its winning formula and stuck to it. But it was lacking something, wasn't it, without that Tim Whitnell spark to really bring it to life.
Yes, I wonder how much we would have noticed that if we'd never seen Tim Whitnell. Probably not at all, really.
You could come into the show and really enjoy it and not really realise how much better it could be. We were impressed watching that episode with Mike first. Mike number 1 of 4, weren't we?
Yes.
Quite a charismatic performance from young Matt Wright there, who unfortunately it doesn't seem stayed young for very long, which then people don't, do they? Because in series 3 of Mike and Angelo, which is the first one that I know I saw bits of, Matt Wright is quite tall, grown-up, mid-teenaged, and perhaps has lost some of his boyish appeal, which is rather a shame. But what's good about Series 3 is that Tim Whitnell takes over the role of Angelo. Apparently, the first episode of Series 3 ends with Tyler Butterworth dying on the sofa, and then he regenerates, just like in Doctor Who, into Tim Whitnell. And then you get Tim Whitnell looking at his new face in the mirror and saying, "Ha, you ain't seen nothing yet." And I can just imagine him doing that in his quirky Angelo way. So I'd like to see the first episode of Series 3 if I ever get the opportunity, but sadly it's not on YouTube or anything. So then you get the third series, which is Shelley Thompson as Rita, Matt Wright as Mike, and Tim Whitnell as Angelo. And I think there the show probably blossoms into something like what it can and should be. As I say, I do remember watching when I was quite small, it must have been 1990, so I was about 7, episodes from the third series with proper Angelo, Tim Whitnell, and brown-haired original Mike, and I remembered it as being very, very sci-fi. Angelo, we haven't mentioned yet, had a lot of interesting alien-esque powers, walking on the ceiling being a principal one, but making little bits and bobs, useful things round the house. What does he do in that episode from Series 2? He turns a load of ice cubes into a long ice spear, doesn't he?
Yes, I can't remember why that's useful.
He has to stab the tribble-like thing with it, doesn't he?
Oh, yes. But it's okay, it doesn't die horribly or anything.
No, it reverts it back to the egg form.
That's right.
So he had lots of little interesting tricks, which I guess is the USP of the show, Angelo and his little magic tricks around the house. It's all set in the house in Cricklewood. You never get out, well, occasionally you get an outside scene in Rita's office or something, but it's mainly staged around this house set, and it's very effectively and very well done. But yes, I remembered that third series as being very sci-fi, doors into different dimensions on the landing and things like that. And I think from little bits I've seen of it on YouTube, it is quite sci-fi-ish. And that is the direction the show steers away from in later years. A lot of the series we watched, many of the episodes, Angelo could just be a kind of funny guy, quirky guy who's not necessarily an alien, and then randomly see him sitting on the ceiling and think, oh, why is he doing that? If you're not familiar with the earlier series. But anyway, I don't think Rosie really has memories of watching brown-haired original Mike and Tim Whitnell the first time round, do you?
No, I found it hard to believe when you happened to mention one day that there used to be a different Mike, one who wasn't Mike number 2.
And then I also remembered, and I was hoping this would be a false memory, because it's rather annoying, that there was a series, or most of a series, where there was no Mike at all. And that is in fact true. In Series 4, original Mike, who's probably about 6'5" and towering over Rita and Tim Whitnell by then, goes back to Boston with his dad. And Angelo does a whole series with this girl next door character. She's called Ellie, I think, instead of a Mike, which is fine as far as it goes, but I was always rather disappointed coming across that on CITV and finding Mike and Angelo with no Mike.
At least there was another child. I had visions of just Angelo and Rita. But on this website that you're going to paste in the URL, I was reading the episodes for that series, and Ellie's in about half of them, and the other half it mentions another character with a girl's name. I can't remember what it is. I should have thought to check. And do you remember talking about this? I said half the episodes have got this other girl in them. Do you think she's probably a child as well? And you said, oh yes, probably.
Interesting.
But we don't have any confirmation of that. There's nothing on YouTube or anything.
Yes, there is an Ellie episode on YouTube, which we did find quite interesting to watch. She's very much being the Mike in the episode, even though she's not called Mike. I don't know, maybe the show's kind of lost its way a bit there in Series 4, just like Nightmare. One thing I meant to mention about Series 3, which is the proper Mike and proper Angelo, original Mike and proper Angelo series, is that it's actually the longest series. All the others are 10 episodes, and Series 3 is 13 episodes. I don't know if they extended it unexpectedly when they realised how good Tim Whitnell was to try and get in as much of him and original Mike as possible, or is it just a happy accident? I don't know.
In the Ellie episode that is on YouTube, Angelo uses his alien powers to make the house and what's in it look impoverished, doesn't he? Because he's trying to get Rita's boss to give her a pay rise.
That's right, yes, and that's kind of the sort of magic he does later on. Changing the house in certain ways, getting certain costumes for everybody. And if you didn't know he's an alien and you're coming into it, you might think he's gone down to the costume shop or has a friend who's a builder or something. But you can kind of infer that all these wacky things that happen round the house and to the house are Angelo's alien powers.
Yes, he does all that sort of thing completely off-screen, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. Whereas in the earlier ones, I think he does all of his magical sequences on-screen. So that's, I suppose, why it does feel more sci-fi, fantastical, perhaps, in the earlier series. So Series 5 of Mike and Angelo does the very sensible thing of bringing in a new Mike. So it is Mike and Angelo. Now, Michael Benz, as Rosie mentioned, was Mike number 2. Blonde instead of brown-haired, but still American, because he is Rita's nephew, Rita's sister's son. And he completed 6 series of the show. So in half the series of Mike and Angelo, you have Michael Benz as Mike. So he's probably the Mike that springs to mind when you think of Mike and Angelo. Certainly if you properly picked it up where we did, he would be. But I don't know, if you'd watched the whole thing through, he'd stick in your mind, wouldn't he, as having been around the longest, by far the longest.
Definitely.
And what a good idea it was to bring him in. And what a good job he does over his 6 series. It's interesting, he's quite young, quite small, quite cute at the beginning, and in his final series, he's taller than Angelo, probably.
I think so.
With very, very long hair and looking very, very grown up and grungy. I can see why they got rid of him when they did, because, well, Mike's supposed to be a kid, and he wasn't anymore.
He is allowed to be a teenager for longer than Mike number 1. I think he kept his appeal for a bit longer.
Ah, yes. Yes, they certainly squeezed all the Mike and Angelo out of him that they could. So, Series 5 and 6, 2 series, have this new Mike, Mike number 2, and Rita, and of course Tim Whitnell as Angelo. And I don't think I sat and watched every episode of those 2 series on CITV, but I certainly did sit and watch a lot of it, most of it. And did you as well?
I'd say that I sat and watched some of it.
It's not something we used to rush home for every week, but it was on at like 4:15 time slot, so we'd be there and watching the telly, and Mike Angelo, yes, we'll watch that. But I don't think we'd have bothered setting it when we'd gone out to the doctors or something. And from what we've seen of those series on YouTube, a couple of episodes, it still seems quite sci-fi to me. There's the one where Mike and Angelo both get lost in the Phantom Zone, and Rita's worried about them, as you would be. And it's quite alien-esque still.
They are able to communicate with Angelo via the television or something, aren't they? Which is very sci-fi.
When we watched that YouTube episode, I thought, oh yes, this is more like I remembered it being early on. We're getting into the middle times now, of course. But once you've seen Series 7 onwards, you might be surprised by how sci-fi-ish it is when you look back at the beginning.
The way I remember it, the ones that we used to watch religiously, it's just sort of getting into scrapes, isn't it?
Getting into scrapes. That brings us very nicely on to Series 7 of Mike and Angelo, and this was when we really picked it up and watched it every week. I remember thinking when Series 5 started, and the CITV presenter was saying, there's a new Mike, it's the old Mike's cousin. I thought, oh good, yes, it needs a Mike. And I think from then I very much considered myself a fan of the show, a watcher of the show, which is why we came in to sit down and watch Series 7 when it began. And the very first thing I noticed when Series 7 started was that in the opening music, which we must talk about in just a second, it no longer said, starring Shelley Thompson. Now, Rita had always been credited first. She was the last remaining original actor in Series 5 and 6, but even from the first series, she'd always been credited first. And instead of that, at the beginning of Series 7, it said, starring Tim Whitnell. And I thought, oh, good, Rita's gone. Now, why on earth did I think that?
I don't know, because there's nothing really wrong with Rita, is there?
No, and you need the Rita character to be the kind of sensible one, the one saying, oh, Mike and Angelo, stop having all these alien-esque scrapes. I don't know why I used to find her annoying, I just did.
You might possibly have found her voice annoying.
I may have done.
American accent when you're a small child and you're not used to that sort of thing.
But watching the repeats with her, I mean, she does what she's there to do perfectly well, and I don't think the show would have suffered if she'd continued for another 6 series at all. But on the other hand, after 6 series, it probably is good to have a new injection of life, fresh talent into the show. And that's what we had in Series 7 with Katie, the new housekeeper. Before we talk about that, let's just mention the opening music. The very early series, as we've discovered on YouTube, have not really a proper introductory theme tune. They have the bit that I was taking off at the beginning of the podcast, which is a kind of annoying mock American voice introducing the show and the characters, and it's rather annoying. But from Series 5 onwards, which is where Michael Benz as Mike 2 comes in, you get the very nice, atmospherically establishing opening theme tune, which when we watched the second episode that Old School Weekend had to offer, which I believe was the Series 8 episode, made Rosie go, oh wow, this reminds me of being young and enjoying Mike and Angelo, as music can do like nothing else.
I wasn't expecting it to make me feel so nostalgic. It's very good. It's difficult to explain why music is good if you're not a music expert. It's sort of fun and quirky like the character in the show.
Sets it up perfectly, doesn't it? And of course in that music opening sequence from Series 5 onwards, you get Tim Whitnell stepping out of the wardrobe, which is quite surprising to read. There used to be another Angelo. You think, did there? But there's Tim Whitnell coming out of the wardrobe in the pilot. But no, it's not actually how it happened.
It's just representing what happened,
yeah.
Like the woof music.
Exactly.
Where he changes from dog to boy in the blink of an eye. But anyway, the interesting thing about Michael Benz is that he can juggle. And Tim Whitnell is also an excellent juggler and had been juggling as Angelo for a few years before he turned up, I suspect. And then they juggle together in the opening title sequences.
Yes, that opening sequence of them juggling for the beginning of Series 5, I think, makes it all the way through to Michael Benn's penultimate series. So the mic and the music, opening music, looks much younger, shorter than he is in the show.
And when they change it, they're still juggling, aren't they? It's just that Michael Benz is older and they're walking up and down some steps.
Yes, which is actually part of one of the episodes, I think. To juggle together in one of the episodes, which is rather nice.
I'm sure the juggling helped Michael Benz to get the part.
Tim Whitnell and Michael Benz do make a great duo as Mike and Angelo. I'm sure Tim Whitnell and Matt Wright were good together as well, because I did used to enjoy watching them, but I wish I could see them together properly.
That would be good, but Michael Benz and Tim Whitnell have the kind of chemistry that you just can't plan.
Yes, they do some really funny things together. With Rita gone in Series 7, as we were saying a few moments ago, you need the character to come and say, "Oh, Angelo, what are you doing? You burned the house down, you've accidentally robbed the bank, you've made Mike believe he's better than us by turning him into a lord." And that character is Katie, the housekeeper, who has been hired by Rita, or Rita leaves instructions and money and arrangements to hire a housekeeper to look after Mike, who is her nephew, and Angelo, who is her alien, while she goes back to Boston, presumably to catch up with her own son, Mike, and see what's going on there. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Mike's having his education in Cricklewood, and the housekeeper is hired to keep house for him.
Yes, very much so.
And I think Rita's quite rich by this point with her advertising business, so she can afford to do that.
And I know for a fact that the first Katie Murphy episode, that's who plays Katie, is all about people coming to interview with Mike and Angelo for the job of housekeeper, and all being complete crap, and then Katie turning up at the end and getting the job. And I think there was even a moment of them saying, "None of these housekeepers are any good. We're going to have to shut up the house. Mike's going to have to go back to America, and Angelo is going to have to go back to his home planet," or something. I'm sure there was this sort of atmosphere of despair, and Katie turns up, and they say, "Oh, sorry, you're too late. We've decided we don't want a housekeeper anymore." And then they say, "Oh, well, let's interview her anyway and see if we can stay and all live together."
Classic sitcom stuff, really, and you might start to worry about the future of the show if you hadn't already seen the three of them together in the opening credits.
And I'm also sure that I watched every single episode from that one onwards. So when I was watching it religiously, it was Michael Benz, Tim Whitnell and Katie Murphy. And that's why I think they're the correct trio for Mike and Angelo.
They did 4 series as a trio. So that would be, wouldn't it, series 7, 8, 9 and 10. Yes. And that's by far the most of any group of characters, and they do have a lot of great chemistry together. And yes, for me too, it seems like that is the show with the right status quo, because that's what we used to watch. And yeah, we obviously did find it very appealing, because we did from that point come back and watch every episode and set it on the video if we were going to be out at the doctor's or something. We had a great time watching it, and I don't know, would we have continued to do so if it had been Rita still? Would we have just engaged with the show because we were perhaps a little bit older and were finding that we understood it, enjoyed it more? Would we have connected with its new sort of less sci-fi, more farcical nature? Perhaps we would. I think it all helps to come together to create the kind of show that drew us in and kept us fixed. Which is interesting because it's quite a change from its original format and point, as it were. As I mentioned, the second Old School Weekend episode was a Mike, Katie, Angelo episode called Airs and Graces, where Mike discovers he's a lord or something, I mean, just for that episode. And Angelo, off-screen, magically transforms the house into a kind of lordly manor and starts serving sycophantically over Mike. It's terribly good, Tim Whitnell, wasn't it, playing these little characters, Angelo in the roles of these little characters like the butler in that episode. And in doing so, at first Mike feels, "Oh, I don't want this is embarrassing, stop it, Angelo." And then, of course, he gets all hoity-toity because of how Angelo's been treating him, and sends Angelo and Katie to live in the shed, and by the end of it they all make up and realise to go back to the status quo, and it was a very engaging episode, wasn't it?
Yes, I think that was a good choice for Old School Weekend.
If only the first one had been Tim Whitnell and Matt Wright, as I was hoping, but then I guess they thought they'd better show us both Angelos, not realising that the first one was absolutely useless.
They probably don't know these things like we do, the show choosers. They just know the bare facts.
Yes, indeed. I thought we might mention a couple of bits of humour from that Airs and Graces episode, to give a kind of flavour of the sort of thing we used to laugh at in it. We very much enjoyed the fact that Katie had bought Mike some new rollerblades for his birthday and was saying to Angelo, now, don't let on, we've got these rollerblades, must be kept secret. I know what you're like, Angelo, you might let it slip. And he's like, oh, don't worry, Katie, I won't let anything slip, I won't let him know.
And then 2 seconds later, Mike comes in with his broken old rollerblades, saying, it'll take me a year to save up for a new pair of rollerblades.
And no one's expecting Angelo to say anything bad to give him away at that point, but he goes straight for...
then it's a good thing we just bought you. And then Katie shuts him up.
Brilliant, because it's classic sitcom stuff, that, isn't it? But they surprise us by bringing it in so early.
We thought it was going to take longer, a bit subtler than that.
Very, very good. An excellent delivery from Tim Whitnell, of course. And then the other bits when Katie and Angelo are in the shed lamenting how things have turned out, and Angelo's made some cocoa, and Katie's trying to have quite a deep discussion with him about everything, and she says, what is this, or what is it, at some point?
What is this?
And she's
Scottish, by the way.
Oh, yes. That's why she says it like that. She means, what is this horrible situation we're in? How did this happen? But, of course, Angelo just goes...
Well, it's cocoa, isn't it?
Yes, he thinks she's talking about the cocoa. There's his naivety, and very, very, very skillfully, funnily delivered by Tim Whitnell. Brilliant stuff.
Another very good one that's on YouTube is the one where Angelo accidentally robs a bank.
Oh, that's brilliant!
He's got no idea he's robbed this bank. He's brought home this bag of money and he's saying to Mike, oh, someone just left it in the shopping centre. And then it's on the news that there's been this robbery and here's the thief on CCTV and it's Angelo doing this naive grin at the security camera.
That's absolutely brilliant. It's this kind of naive, affable haplessness that Tim Whitnell brings to the role that I think Tyler Butterworth just never even got close to capturing.
And then Mike's asking him about the man who dropped the bag, and Angelo says, I couldn't see his face.
Why not?
He had a stocking ball over his head.
And he doesn't realise that means that the guy has just robbed the bank. It's brilliant stuff. Angelo never comes across as annoyingly naive. You always know that he's going to say something like that, and everyone's going to go, oh, Angelo, or Angelo, which is Katie's catchphrase. But it's always funny.
Michael Benz is particularly good in that one, too, when this policeman comes round. Mike answers the door, and he's going, police, police, which is very funny.
Yes. I do think, really, the show's longevity there is thanks to the chemistry between Michael Benz and Tim Whitnell, and I don't know, it's almost like a whole separate show from the first one.
Another one you can find on YouTube with those three is Angelo borrowing money from a loan shark.
Mr. Sharky?
That's right. And it's very funny when he's getting into all this debt and he just has no idea.
Again, naivety. Absolutely brilliant stuff. So, as I say, they did series 7, 8, 9 and 10 together, and they were a fantastic series, and really, the show at its peak, beyond all doubt, in my opinion, and I think Rose did as well.
Definitely. It has got to do with our age and when we watched it, of course.
It has indeed, yes.
It would be interesting to find out what a more objective person thinks about it.
Yes, or someone who really, really liked lots of sci-fi in their alien-based shows, might prefer earlier. Might even think that original Mike, Rita... I don't know. Could you prefer original Angelo? Not if you've watched Tim Whitnell at his best and you realise what a good comedy performance actually is. I don't know. I'd really like to see the long series 3 and see if in some ways that's the peak, certainly of it being a kind of sci-fi show. But there we are. It's all speculation for now. Series 11 of Mike and Angelo, after Michael Benz had left because he really couldn't be a young boy character anymore, introduced the third Mike. But it wasn't Mike, it was Mickey, because it was a girl, and she was played by Gemma Gregory, who went on to have her own children's BBC series called Gypsy Girl, which you may remember being advertised.
No.
Don't know if it was any good, but she was very good, Gemma Gregory.
I think all the children in Mike and Angelo were very good. The casting directors were obviously very good at finding children.
Now, Mickey was the niece of a sort of posh next-door neighbour character called Daphne Fawkes Bentley, who was played by Elizabeth Estenson, who was the original Teabag. Links with Lee Pressman and Grant Cathro there. And she'd already been in the show quite a bit, recurring character coming around saying, "Oh, Angelo, what have you done to my garden fence?" and that sort of thing. So Mickey was her niece, and that was her way in. And you do get to wondering, just in practical terms, why is Rita over in Boston still keeping this house when Mike, her nephew, is no longer there? She's hiring the housekeeper just to keep her alien, Angelo. And when you stop and think about it, it's stopped completely making sense, hasn't it?
We thought maybe she and Katie decided that Katie wanted to stay in the house and would pay her some rent and not be housekeeper anymore.
Yeah, I think you can kind of infer, if you want to, if you care to look at it that deeply, that Katie and Angelo are now kind of house sharing in Rita's house and paying Rita the rent. And that's kind of backed up because in Series 12, the final series, Katie mentioned several times going out to work, and her work used to be living in the house and looking after Mike and Angelo, but we reckon she now works at a nursery, day nursery or something, don't we?
Doesn't she come home at lunchtime?
Come home at lunchtime,
and stay there, so we think because she's a housekeeper nanny sort of person, it makes sense that she would do something like that.
And that does make a lot of sense. So yeah, they're kind of renting the house from Rita when Mike too has gone. Now, unfortunately, there aren't any Series 11 Mickey episodes on YouTube, and we can't really say that much about them, can we? But it's typical Mike and Angelo getting into trouble kind of stuff. Given that Michael Benz was so old, I think it was very much the best they could do for more series, don't you?
Yes, I'm afraid I can't actually remember anything that they did, Mickey and Angelo.
No, but then the final series, Series 12, you get Mike number 4, who is an actual Mike, and he is Katie's nephew.
As you find out in about episode 4.
My nephew Mike, and we're like, oh, that's who he is.
He's just been sort of hanging around the house being Mike with Angelo.
Now, does he actually live in the house with them? I'm not sure, but perhaps he just comes round to visit.
I think he does. I think I've come away with that impression.
Now, he's played by Stephen Geller.
And he's very good too.
And he's, yes, excellent. We've seen a few of his episodes on YouTube, and I thought he was really good. And I think we agreed, didn't we, that the ideas in the show were kind of on their last legs by Series 12, and there was a lot of Angelo's time machine bringing people out of the past and stuff, and things we'd really seen before.
There's an episode on YouTube where it brings a pirate and he's going around looking for treasure.
Not the best, which is inevitable after, 12 series on air. And I thought, I'd like to see Stephen Geller with some of the peak material, see how he does, because I thought he was excellent. So, plenty of speculation there, but plenty of facts as well.
What's our favourite joke from the Stephen Geller series?
I was surprised it was this late, actually, but yeah, it was in one of the ones on YouTube with Stephen Geller, Series 12.
I knew that because I remembered it being with Stephen Geller.
Aha. Katie, again, classic sitcom setup here, like interviewing nannies, housekeepers. Katie's having a birthday, and she's worried everyone's forgotten and is trying to drop hints that it's her birthday, and
she's saying things like, do you know what day it is tomorrow, and it's a special day, and things like that. And Angelo's coming out with his Tuesday and all that kind of thing. The usual kind of thing. But then again, they put a bit of a spin on it, make it a bit different by having him come out with, oh, of course, it's dust Dustbin Day.
Dustbin Day! That is a new one. They manage to milk old comedy cliches almost into unexpected new funny material, which is very good work, particularly after 12 series.
And Stephen Geller's not in that scene, but the reason I remembered it was him was because I remembered what happened next, which was that Angelo couldn't afford to get Katie anything more than a small tag with a nice message on, and it ends up on top of a really expensive television that's been delivered to the wrong house. So then Katie finds it and thinks Angelo's given her a massive TV.
Great stuff, that. It's all very familiar. If you've watched one episode, or if you've watched 5 episodes, you've watched them all, really. But it's always tremendously well done and always made us laugh.
And you can find that Dustbin Day episode on YouTube as well, I think.
Do look for it. As inevitably happened in the fullness of time, the show did come to an end, that 12th series in 2000 with its final series. And it was around that time that CITV really stopped making shows, commissioning new series of things, and started showing a lot of repeats and imports, and then children's ITV went completely off terrestrial television, which was a bit of a shame, really. But Mike and Angelo had certainly had a very good, very impressive run. I know it would have been fun to sneak out a couple more series with Stephen Geller, if possible, before he grew up and lost all his appeal, but there we are. Well, I think the show definitely reached an organic ending at that point.
Given that it is 2000, it just goes to show how the olden days were coming to an end.
Weren't they, in so many ways? The very, very end of Mike and Angelo, Series 12, which you can see on YouTube, involves Angelo achieving worldwide televisual fame coverage with a song he's written for some rich person in the episode, and he's going to have quite a successful music career, it seems. And Tim Whitnell, actually, is a musician. Has written a lot of music for TV shows, some children's TV shows.
Scratchy and Co.
Yes.
I remember him on Scratchy and Co. claiming to have written the music, and they're not believing him, and they paused the credits and stuff so he could prove it.
And if you look him up on Wikipedia, you'll see he's done music and producing and things for all sorts of shows, not just children's shows.
And in Mike and Angelo, he sometimes whips out a ukulele or something, doesn't he? More than we remembered.
Yeah, it's why Angelo does a lot of music, singing and dancing. He's a one-man band at one point. And that website that you were mentioning earlier, which has a lot of Mike and Angelo detail, speculates that when Angelo was having his moment in the spotlight on international television, singing his song, becoming famous, wouldn't it be nice to think that Rita and both Mikes were watching him over in Boston and thinking, oh, look at that. We'll have to get back in touch and see if he'll come and visit us in Boston on his world tour. And perhaps the show, the universe, moved on from that house in Cricklewood at that point. And I think it's certainly nice to think so.
Yeah, it's a very fitting end to the series.
I think so. It certainly can be viewed as one. So there we are, Mike and Angelo, a show we remember with great fondness, great laughs, and if ever you have an opportunity to see a bit of it on YouTube, or if CITV ever show another old school weekend kind of thing after 35 years or 40 years, who knows, certainly give it a go, because it's extremely amusing. Let's just quickly mention the 2 other shows that were done by the same production company, studio, and very much the same style as Mike and Angelo, which I think were both Lee Pressman and Grant Cathro as well, which were Snap and Polterguests. They very much had the same sort of style, didn't they? All set in one house, kind of set-piece comedy, rushing around, getting into farcical scrapes and that sort of thing. Snap was on in the late 90s. There were 3 series, and it was set at a photography studio.
That's right. The boys' father was a photographer, and Christy Bruce, who was in an awful lot of things as a child in that sort of time, was his friend, and this woman called Ellen worked there. And what about that sort of wheeler-dealer character? What was he doing there?
Yes, I'm not sure what he was doing there. He's very famous in Reddington for playing a character called Tricky Dicky on EastEnders, and I don't know why he came to this photography studio all the time. Was he a business associate or something?
I don't have a clue, but he was very good. And actually, I thought the last series was the best, where the dad and Ellen, the woman, got replaced with Ben, is his name, isn't it? The child.
Yes, the child's called Ben.
Got replaced with Ben's mum, Jane, and against all the stereotypes and general rules, she was funnier and a better character than the dad, because dads and men are supposed to be funnier than women, aren't they? Whatevs. And she and Ian Reddington character, they had really good chemistry and really funny and got into some excellent scrapes together. And I seem to remember children might even have been a little sideline sometimes.
Yes, I remember that third series with fondness as well. There's that bit where Victor Maguire, who's a terribly funny comedy actor, is playing the burglar, and Tricky Dicky and Jane were trying to knock him out. And
That's right. Tricky Dicky, whatever his name was, is trying to distract him, and Jane's got this vase that she's supposed to hit him over the head with.
now, Jane, now!
And it's not working out. It's very good.
Yeah, so we used to enjoy Snap quite a bit. It's no Mike and Angelo, but certainly Mike and Angelo methadone. And the other one like that was Polterguests, which was on in the spring of 1999, which I specifically remember because we were living in a particular place that we only lived in during the spring of 1999. And there were only 8 episodes of it, and the set piece there was this hotel, which the woman, Annie, and her daughter, Ella, were running together, and it was haunted by these 3 ghosts, the poltergeists. They kind of helped with the running of the hotel after having come to terms with the fact that people were moving in. I think that was very well done and quite funny as well.
I enjoyed that. I wish that there was more of it, and she was funny as well, that mum character.
Oh, they do well with their mum characters.
And Katie Murphy, she's funny as well.
Yes, I wonder if Rita's the weakest of the 4 mum characters.
I think she's the least comedic.
Yes. So, there we go. Perhaps I was right all along in thinking, oh good, Rita's left. Yeah, we enjoyed Poltergeists. They were from 3 different time periods, the ghosts. There was the medieval minstrel kind of character who was called Tristan.
Yeah.
And he used to talk about being in Camelot, actually, so I suppose he wasn't really medieval.
No, it was even earlier.
And there was Squiffy, who's the sort of Georgian fock ghost.
Lord Squiffington is his real name. And actually, they use that name in Mike and Angelo, don't they?
Oh, they do!
In the Mike's the Lord episode, he's expecting Lord Squiffington.
And the other ghost is this gangster character called Kneecaps.
Kneecaps is a brilliant name. He obviously used to go around breaking kneecaps in his lifetime.
Yes, he did, but he actually had this interesting ongoing storyline where he was wanting to make amends with or clear his name with his grandson or something who was played by the same actor.
I'll tell you what I remember. I remember there's one where Ella is worried that the mum is going to marry someone, and she is confiding in Tristan, and he's giving her advice, which is a good thing to do with characters. And there's one where, for some reason, is her name Annie, the mum?
Yeah.
She has to do sort of posh cooking for somebody. It's something to do with the hotel, but it's like a really big deal, and these people are coming round to see what she cooks, and Squiffy has been telling her what to cook, and it's got all posh names and stuff, and she's saying she's making this soup which is something and blah-de-blah-de-blah a la Squiffington, and they're saying, oh, well, that's a very long name, isn't it? What's that in simple English? And she says, Squiffy soup. I remember that bit.
Yes, it was very comedic, very funny, and yeah, we did enjoy it. I was just thinking it's quite like Mike and Angelo, I suppose. You've got the ghosts and coming in to help rather than the alien. It's kind of a variation on a theme, but very well done. So there we are, Mike and Angelo and associated shows. Well worth a watch if ever you get the opportunity. And that concludes this podcast, but do join us again next time for another podcast, which will be on the subject of
the adaptations of Little Women and Little Men.
Goodness me, something a bit more highbrow. So hopefully you'll join us for that. Until then, good night out there.
Whatever you are.